Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to run through how I have drawn this rose using coloured pencils. So this was a first for me. I haven't tried anything sort of botanical or anything in depth before, so this was a first subject matter for me. So I'm really pleased with how the results actually turned out for this. If you want to view the full tutorial, it's a full 4-hour tutorial available right now over on my website. So if you click on my website and you go to the tutorial page, then you can subscribe up there for £10 per month and you get access to a whole load of tutorials. As always, all of the materials used throughout this tutorial and portrait are listed in the description below, and there are Amazon affiliate links and Jackson's affiliate links of where you can actually find those. So let's get straight into this rose. So this I used a limited colour palette for. So I used a palette of 9 coloured pencils for this. So you can see the pencils are just listed on the left hand side of the video, and I just started this portrait right in the centre of the rose, and I just erased the outline of my graphite using a Tombow Mono Zero round tip eraser. So I just gently erased all of that graphite because this rose is actually quite light in colour, especially on the tips of the petals. I wanted to make sure that I didn't have any of that graphite showing through, because that was going to leave a really sort of nasty line showing in my work if I didn't erase that. So I just made sure that I erased that line as much as I could without actually erasing it fully so I couldn't see where I was going. I then started to lay down my base layers. So the colours that I used for the base layers for this were actually some light flesh from the Polychromos and some burnt sienna 10% from the Luminance as well. So I did 2 layers of each of those colours. I did 2 layers of the light flesh, then 2 layers of burnt sienna, and then the method that I chose to work in for this portrait was actually to burnish and blend with my white pencil. So a lot of people like to use odorless mineral spirits, I see, when they're doing botanical work and things like that. So I wanted to create a tutorial where I didn't actually use any of those kinds of blending methods to enable you to get the smooth results that you see when people are using those methods. So what I did was use my Caran d'Ache Luminance white pencil, and I just burnished the layers of those 4 colours. So I used that pencil after I'd added that final layer of burnt sienna 10%, smoothed everything out, and you can see as I'm working through this that I do that quite a lot, and you can see that it actually dulls down the colour. So afterwards, I need to go back in with my midtones and really hype up those pinks. So the pinks that I used for the midtones and for bringing that vibrancy back to the rose were some pink carmine, some light magenta, madder, and light purple pink. And again, those are all from the Polychromos range as well. So what I did was just mapped out all of the shadows and all of those sort of dark areas within the petals here, especially in the middle was quite challenging to begin with because you needed to map out all of those shadows and get the form of the rose 100% correct. If you start in the middle and you don't have that form correct, then it can often make the rose, when you're finished, look really kind of abnormal, and it won't look realistic because you haven't got the folds of the petals where you haven't got those contrasts and shadows incorrectly. So what I did was I used the light purple pink pencil, and I used that very, very lightly to begin with and just mapped out the beginnings of the shadows. So you can see I've sort of outlined where the petals meet each other, where you've got some of those shadows where you've got some sort of more open petals and you've got the shadows down right in the very bottom of the centre of the flower. So that's sort of where I added all of those shadow areas, and you can see then I've layered over some of the darker colours. So once I've got that very light layer of that shadow mapped out with a light purple pink, then I've gone in with the pink carmine and then also the madder pencil as well. So they are some really good tones to add when you're doing a pink flower or any kind of pink work like this. They're a mixture of the warm pink tones and the cool pink tones. So you'll see that the light magenta, if you have this pencil, if you swatch it down, then it does often have a sort of blue look to it, and that's really good for the cooler toned areas. And the pink carmine, that has a really quite warm look to it. The madder pencil as well is quite a cool toned red. So just using a mixture of those warm and cool toned pinks and reds, it creates a really nice effect within the portrait here. So after I had added those further colours into those shadow areas, then I made sure that I used that Caran d'Ache Luminance white pencil to burnish and blend everything out once more. So when I talk about burnish and blending with the white pencil and other pencils, I'm using it in the same way that I would use my ordinary pencils to layer. So I'm not adding any extra pressure to the pencil, I'm just using it as if it was another layer of coloured pencil. And that's the key to burnishing and blending. A lot of people often go in and use a really hard pressure, and then they realise that they can't actually add as many layers as they wanted because they've pushed too hard and burnished too much and damaged the tooth of the paper with that white pencil or whatever pencil they're using for burnishing. So you want to make sure that you use a really light pressure. Just use your pencil in the same way that you would other layers, and you'll find that you'll be able to add as many layers as you want because you're using that light pressure, you're not damaging the tooth of the paper, and you're preserving the tooth so you can add more colours over the top. So when I've burnished and blended everything out with that white pencil, it knocks the colour back once more, so then I just go back in and add and bring some vibrancy and hype up the contrast between those lights and darks areas. So you can see on the petals that I've already coloured here, you've got one or two really bright white areas, and that's where I haven't added those shadow areas. But once I've gone in and added those shadow areas, it creates an even more luminous white colour against those petals, and that's because, again, you're hyping up the contrasts. Realism is completely all about adding contrasts and shadows in the right place to enable it to look realistic. So by adding the shadows in exactly the right places, you can make your white areas look even whiter, even though they might not necessarily be white. So those two white petals that you can see sort of at the top of the rose there, they look quite white, but you'll see that if you look back through the progress, I actually added a lot of pink down, so that those two white areas actually contain 2 layers of light flesh and 2 layers of the burnt sienna 10%, and even a little bit of the light purple pink in there as well. But if you put those petals and those colours next to an even darker colour, it's going to make those lighter colours look even lighter. So I apply this same method of working, of applying 2 base colours of the light flesh and the burnt sienna, 2 layers of each. That is the process that I've used over the entire rose. There aren't any parts on this rose that I haven't added those 2 layers to. And then I've added in all of the other colours on top where those shadows are, and then burnished out with that white pencil. And that's the process that I have applied across the entirety of this rose. And it's a really simple process when you can get the hang of it. I see a lot of people often find it difficult to add very light layers, and they often ask me how they can limit the pressure on their pencils. And the advice that I can give to you to limit the pressure is to hold your pencils quite far back towards the end. So don't hold it near the tip where you've got that wood casing exposed. You want to hold it towards the other end. So on the polychromos pencils, if you hold it towards the gold band, that's where you're going to be able to limit the pressure that you put through your pencil. So hold it quite far towards the end and just shade back and forth and use very little pressure throughout your hand. So to enable yourself to use less pressure in your hand, you want to loosen the grip. So don't hold your pencil really tight between your fingers. You want to loosen that grip and loosen the pressure through your fingers. So just literally place the pencil in your hand and then work it across the paper. That's all you really need to do to enable yourself to get light layers. It requires a little bit of practice for a few people, so if you're finding it hard, then just practice on a scrap piece of paper before actually applying the technique to a portrait that you intend to sell or that you want to make prints from or anything like that. Just practice your techniques and it will come to you. You can see right here the demonstration of the burnishing and the light layers. So I've added those 2 base colours down, so that light flesh, burnt sienna 10%, 2 layers of each, then I've burnished out with that white pencil, and you can see that I'm adding all of those shadow areas and those darker parts within the petals with those midtones, and then again with those darker colours. So I'm going in with the light purple pink, adding and mapping out all of my shadow areas, and then I'm going in with the madder and the pink carmine, and then a little bit of the light magenta as well. So the light magenta is another colour which I've used for burnishing throughout this rose portrait as well. and that's because it's a really light colour and it sort of adds that cool tone to the flower and the petals. So on the reference photo that I used, the left hand side of the rose was quite a cooler tone, so that's the place where I've used a majority of the light magenta, and on the right hand side of the rose is where there were a lot more warmer tones. So on the right hand side I've used a lot more of the light flesh for burnishing rather than the light magenta. So the light magenta I've used for burnishing in the cooler toned areas there. So one thing that I find really important when you're drawing roses and flowers is to constantly reassess your lights and your darks. So the process through drawing this, I did it petal by petal, and after I'd had coloured each petal and finished it, I then assessed the other petals which I'd drawn and coloured and seen if there were any changes that I needed to make. So I looked at the other petals, I looked to see if there were any changes that I needed to make to the lights and dark areas, because once I found I'd added another petal, it often made the entire rose look completely different. So I constantly sat back, took a little step back and assessed where I needed to add or adjust any colours. I also, after I'd done each petal, when I was making these adjustments, I made sure that I went round each petal where they meet one another with my darker coloured pencils. I mainly used the Madder pencil just to outline any edges, any crisp edges which were showing up on the reference photo. So mainly underneath where you've got those curls, where those petals curl over one another, so those light bits that you can see on the portrait at the moment. I mainly added the madder and the darker colours directly underneath those, because I found that once I was adding more petals, those areas were the ones that were getting lost. So I just added a darker colour pencil directly underneath those overlapped areas. So when I was drawing those overlapping areas, they actually required quite a bit of shading, and you can see that I'm just shading one just now. So for that, I added down my base layers, so the light flesh and the burnt sienna, and then burnished it out. And then I went over with another layer of the burnt sienna 10%, and then I added a little bit of red violet over the top there as well. And I found that the red violet gave this portrait and this picture of this rose a really nice shadow tone. I added the burnt sienna 10% down and the red violet and burnished it out together with the white pencil, and I found that it gave a really nice shadow for those curled over areas at the edges of the rose there. You can also see on the very bottom petal, that largest one there, what I was saying earlier about adding those darker colours underneath those curled over areas to make it look as though those whiter areas are actually curling over and standing out. So you can see I've just added some of the colours directly underneath. They just got a very, very small shadow line, and that's where I've added some madder and the red violet underneath there. So I found this process to be really, really therapeutic. It was really quite different to working on animals, and I really enjoyed the difference in the subject. It was a little bit testing of the skill, but I applied what I know about colour pencils and what I know on how to create form, and that is to just study your reference photo for a good while before actually starting, and then just plotting out where your lights and your darks are and adding those contrasts appropriately. And then also making sure that I've got a smooth area to work on by using the burnishing method with the white coloured pencil. So we're coming to the last few petals on the rose here, and you can see what I'm doing, just exactly the same process. I'm adding down those base layers, burnishing them out with that white coloured pencil, trying not to add too much pressure because I want to add multiple layers on top. And then I'm going in with the mid-tones with the light purple pink and the pink carmine and just adding in those shadow areas, and then really darkening up all the other areas around the petals as I'm adding this down. So you can see that I add a few additional adjustments into the centre of the rose. I go around each petal with the madder and the red violet just to make sure that each individual petal is obvious within the picture. I don't want to make the petals sort of bleed into one another. I want to make it look as if each individual petal is popping out. So I'm just making sure that I go around each individual petal with some of those colours just to make sure that it's not lost against any others. You can see also that I've added a little bit of texture to the rose. So once I have added those base layers down and burnished them out, I'm then going over with my other layers, adding in those darks and everything and burnishing that out. And then for the final layers, especially on these petals, this large petal right at the front here, I've just added a few lines, because if you look and study an actual rose, you can see that it has like a velvety texture and it's ever so slightly veiny where you've got those veins and natural lines running through the petal. So I've just tried to replicate that sort of texture just by adding a few lines going in the appropriate direction. So on the bottom petal there, you can actually see that all of the lines are stemming from that shadow area and then sort of fanning out towards the ends of the petal where you've got that big curl over there. So I've just added some lines, used a really sharp pencil and just added in very small lines just to give that texture to that rose, so just to make it look all the more realistic by adding in that sort of velvety looking texture there. So I'm just going in and making a few adjustments, just again hyping up those contrasts, adding to the highlights and everything on the picture, and that's basically it. So when you're drawing your own rose or botanical, you want to make sure that you follow the simple rules of just making sure everything's smooth, using really light layers and sharp pencils to enable a nice smooth colour lay down, and just making sure that you burnish and blend everything out and then add a final little bit of texture on top to give it a bit more of a realistic look. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial, guys. Hopefully you have enjoyed this one, and as I said, if you want to follow the full 4-hour version, then head on over to my website and sign up to my tutorial section. There's a whole bunch of other tutorials over there, like the leopard's eye that I created not so long ago, and all my previous Patreon tutorials are on there for you guys as well. If you liked this video, then please give it a thumbs up and comment down below what future tutorials and what other subjects you would like to see me draw, because I'm always interested to know what you guys would like to see here. If you haven't done so already and you're new around here and you like this video, then why not hit that subscribe button and tick that bell icon as well to be notified of all of my future videos as soon as they're released for you guys. Anyway guys, I hope you like this one and I will see you in my next video. Bye!